Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Daniela and today we are going to be doing a quick fire wrap up of all of the books that I have been reading since September to the end of December 2023. I do own the physical copies of some of these, but I cannot be bothered to get them out. So I'm just going to place thumbnails of the front covers here and we're just going to whiz through these and talk about what I've read. First up in September, I read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Bit of a hot take for this one. I know that a lot of people absolutely loved this book. It was getting a lot of hype when I read it. Personally, I think it is overhyped. I gave it 3 stars. As far as thrillers go, it wasn't that exciting. I don't know if I would have categorized this as a thriller. I think maybe more of just general fiction. It is about an author who steals the works of her fellow author Athena Liu. It points at a lot of things wrong with the publishing world currently, and it also kind of like points at things with like social media and how people react to things and the whole like cancel culture thing. I wasn't engrossed all the way through this book. There were sections where I was feeling bored. I pushed through to the end. I found the twist a little bit lackluster. So for me, this was not a fun book to read. Next, I read Too Late by Colleen Hoover. I got this from the library and I started reading it and then I realized, wait, I've already read some of this. So I skipped through to where I couldn't remember and it read the rest of the book. So it must have been one that I DNF'd a while back. I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't anything spectacular. There was periods where I was interested and then there was periods where I was not. And then I feel like it was a little bit predictable. It wasn't the best book that Colleen Hoover has written and I wouldn't recommend it. Next up, I read A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I also give this one 3 stars. Some of the writing in A Little Life is absolutely beautiful. I admire the setup that they put into the book, although I didn't enjoy reading the setup and found it very boring and monotonous and over my head. Eventually, when it got to the reason why we'd been given all of that setup, I was able to understand why the setup was there. Even though it was very boring, I was able to appreciate the work that had been put into that moment and the work that had been put into the setup to give us that final payoff of certain parts of the book. Although I think they could have cut a lot out, it could have been made shorter. It's a very well written book. It's not a happy story. This is not an enjoyable read. I read it out of morbid curiosity and also Andy said it was really good. I think Andy's tolerances are very different to mine. The emotions that I felt throughout were a lot. It's not gonna make you feel nice. There might be like the odd, tiny little bit of relief. If you enjoy
having your heart pulled out of your chest, thrown on the floor, stomped on, shoveled up, thrown into a meat grinder.
If you like pain, then read A Little Life. If you do not like pain, if you do not like to read about suffering, don't read it. Just don't. I do not advise. I do not recommend. If you want to know more about it, I do have a full reading vlog for A Little Life where I do go into a lot of detail about what the story is about and I read out quotes from the book. There's also a bit of footage in there of me reading the end of the book. If you don't want to read it but you want to know what it's all about, you can go and watch that video. I will try and link it in the description. So I read A Little Life from the 11th of September to the 18th of October. It took me a whole month to read A Little Life. And then towards the end of October, going into November, I read Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I also give this book 3 stars. It was not as good as I expected it to be. Jax is my favorite character from the Caravel trilogy, and I was so excited to have a book that was heavily featuring Jax. Although I don't feel like he was that heavily featured throughout the series. I wanted more Jax. I wanted more Jax. That's why I'm reading the books. Our main character, Evangeline, I could have swapped her. I'm not gonna lie. Jax was the only reason I kept reading the series. I think the problem with the series is you start out not really knowing much and the plot doesn't give you much. You are on a journey. You don't really know why you're on a journey. You don't know why the characters want to do what they're doing. You know as much as your main character knows, which is really not a lot. So you're learning as she learns, but it takes like the whole trilogy for her to learn what she's actually doing, which is a bit frustrating. November and December, I also read The Ballad of Never After and A Curse for True Love. I gave The Ballad of Never After 3 stars. For me, this was the weakest of the 3. I think because towards the end of the first book, it kind of starts to ramp up a bit and you think, oh, this is it. The plot plot's going to really kick in now. And then I feel like the second book is definitely a filler book. It doesn't really expand on the plot that much until you get to the end of the book. I feel like the middle book, it has middle book syndrome. It does. A Curse for True Love, the final book, I give 4 stars. I enjoyed it a lot more. Again, not enough Jacks in there for me, but what we did get was so good. We got some little romantic moments there, and I'm just gonna say the bridge scene. I'm pretty sure it's book 3. It could be book 2, but the bridge scene, I wanted more of that. That scene was too short and I needed more. I would say maybe I would reread this. I feel like I would like to reread the Caraval trilogy and then maybe reread Once Upon a Broken Heart again. It's not my favourite series, but I just love Jax as a character. He's such a great character. I love how she set him up. I love his history. I love the twists. He's such a great character. Starting from December, I also read the entirety of the Blood on the Tracks manga series, which is 14 volumes. This started out really, really good. I was giving every volume 4 stars. Yes, 4 stars I give most volumes of this series. There was the odd one where it ended up dropping to 3 stars, but then it picked up again towards the end. This series follows a family, and it follows this young boy, and in particular his mother, and their relationship. And it's one of those things where it makes you feel really uncomfortable, but you can't put it down. You want to know what's going to happen. It's really unhinged, but you're like, but what happens next? I don't think I would necessarily recommend it. If you're down for something that's like a little bit disturbing and unhinged, morally wrong, horror manga series, it's definitely like psychological horror, I'd say. It was very good for making you feel extremely uncomfortable. I couldn't put it down. There's 15 volumes. I give the last one 3 stars. I feel like the ending was a bit of a flop. It kind of lost me towards the end. But other than that, I did enjoy reading them. I then read The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. It's a children's book. It's very simplistic. It has just these beautiful sketches and 1 or 2 lines per page. I gave it 3 stars. To me, there wasn't anything groundbreaking in there. There wasn't really much that I hadn't heard before. Just didn't hit me in the feels the way I thought it would. Next I read Unmasked by Ellie Middleton. It's the ultimate guide to ADHD, autism and neurodivergence. I gave this book 4 stars. I actually got this from my library and I found it whilst I was looking up a different autism book, which is by Dr. Devon Price. I am currently reading that right now, but I wanted to read that because it was recommended by Alison Pages, and I stumbled across this one, which had only just come out, I think, in the last 12 months. It's a young woman, I think she's in her 20s, and she was diagnosed late with autism. Alison Pages is a booktuber that I watch, and she has had a late diagnosis of autism. The reason I'm reading books about this is because what started out as a joke where prior to Ellie's diagnosis, when watching her videos, my partner would point out similarities between me and Alison. And then she got her diagnosis through, and we continued to watch her videos, not thinking anything of it. And Andy would then point out even more things. He's like, you do that, you struggle with that. Eventually, Andy started like looking up things that I would do, and he'd be like, oh, is this an autism thing? And he'd look it up, and he'd be like, oh, it is. And then there'd be something else that I did, and he'd be like, I'm looking that one up. And he'd look it up, and he'd be like, oh, that is as well. And it got to the point where it wasn't a joke anymore. Because I then decided to go on the NHS website and look up autism. And I read through this list, and I think I ticked every box apart from one on this list. And so then I got this book from the library. And I have never related to anything more in my life than when reading this book. I'm still doing research. I'm still looking into this, but I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was really informative. It talks about autism and ADHD because Ellie has both. She's been diagnosed with both, and sometimes the symptoms of both can kind of intertwine. You can end up having both, but it talked about it in a way that if you have it, you could relate to it. If you don't have it, or if you know someone that has it, you can like learn a lot. I'm learning a lot. If you have autism, if you know someone who has autism and you want to understand them better, if you think you could have autism or ADHD, either of those, it's a really good resource. I found it really well written, very easy to understand. It shows experiences from multiple different people as well, and all the sources that Ellie uses are quoted in the back of the book. Next, this was my last book of 2023 and my final book in my reading goal. So I read A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, and we went out with a banger. We got a 5-star book on the final read of 2023. It was so good. I don't want to tell you anything about it. I think this is a book where you should go in completely blind. I would say look up trigger warnings before you read this if you have potential triggers maybe related to family or certain illnesses. Check the triggers before you read it, but if not, go completely blind. We follow a young boy in this story who is visited by a monster, and that's all I'm going to tell you about the book. But I got to the last few pages of this book and I was completely distraught. There was a point where I couldn't even turn the page and I burst into tears just at the thought of what would happen on the next page of the book. And then I did eventually turn that page and then I cried some more. Another sad book, but I gave it 5 stars. I just think it was a really good book. It's really well written, really good read. I'm definitely going to be reading more Patrick Ness books after having read that, and it was a great read to end out 2023. Wow, we've been through a roller coaster of emotions talking about these books. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. I'd love to know what you've been reading recently. Do you have any recommendations for me based on books that I have spoken about, preferably the ones I enjoyed? If you enjoyed this video, as always, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you next time.